Superman, definitely one of the most influential, impactful, and inspirational figure in the entirety of the comic publishing industry ever since he was introduced, was back in the year 1944. Superman have been a true representation of hope all across the world, comforting and reassuringly millions of people that there is always a better way. And being one of the few superhero who choose the path of hope over the path of violence, made him the perfect role model for kids all over the world. But there is a problem. You see, the superhero industry is not the same as the superhero industry it was 100 years ago. From new companies creating their own superheroes with their own virtue and value, to the rise of anti-heroes, who are not classified as being truly good or truly evil. And not only did the superhero industry became extraordinary tense, it became a massive competition with fan, consistently comparing one superhero with another. So rapidly Superman became forgotten and all hope seemed lost for the true fans of Superman. Fans who thought that they were never going to see their beloved hero again. But it was not over for Superman, as they were someone was finally going to present a new version of Superman. A new version of Superman who was going to be not just a representation of hope, but of also a representation of might and strength. Introducing Zack Snyder, the one man who had a new vision for Superman, and his plan was to not only represent a new version of Superman. His plan was to expand the Superman fandom and to prove to the world that Superman was not pointless and that Superman was not boring. And in 2023, Man of Steel was released, quickly becoming one of the most impactful superhero movie of all time. And finally, DC had a chance to finally compete with Marvel, and seeing how Marvel was creating their own successful cinematic universe, DC decided, why not? So they started to create their own cinematic universe, but with Zack Snyder as the head of the entire project. But Zack Snyder's vision for the Justice Leagues was not going to be all sweet and brightly. It was going to be more dark and more realistic. And Zack Snyder had completely no problem with DC most sensitive characters like Batman and Superman committing horrible acts like killing if it was completely necessary. But what Zack Snyder completely failed to realize was that by creating and introducing a new fandom for each and every members of the Justice Leagues, he had completely neglected the old fandom. The old fandom, who wanted to see a more brighter and hopeful version of the Justice Leagues, and who thought that it was unforgivable for characters like Superman or Batman to kill. And DC was not a fine please either, as the studio was in an absolute chaos with no stable direction and no stable vision. DC was in complete chaos, and as if things couldn't get bad enough, everything started to fall apart. With the death of Zack Snyder's daughter, this was the final blow for DC Cinematic Universe, as it was announced mouth letter that Zack Snyder version of the Justice Leagues will no longer be continued. This flat like the end of DC. But little did the people know that there was still DC, as a recent director was going to completely rebuild them. DC Cinematic Universe under a new vision was going to be completely inspired by the comic. Introducing James Gunn. Unlike Zack Snyder, James Gunn's vision of Superman was manly centered and inspired around the comics. To put it in a more clear perspective, James Gunn's vision for Superman was to introduce a comic book accurate version of Superman to the world, reintroducing the bright and colorful Superman the whole world though had forgotten. But what James Gunn failed, or completely forgot to realize, was that when it came to comics, Marvel had always had the upper hand, especially when it came to comics book sales, and centering your main hero, the same hero who was supposed to be the feces of your cinematic universe, was natural challenging as it was completely risky. But what James Gunn failed to realize was that, by completely replacing the version of Superman that Zack Snyder worked so hard to build for a more comic book, a cute version of Superman completely went again the new fandom who loved the version who was created by Zack Snyder, so replacing with a version of Superman who was always treated as a joke did not only broke the fans, but the fans flat completely unseen, and they also flat completely and unheard, especially considering the awful ways in which the actors who played the Justice Leagues left DC. So not only did James Gunn completely divided the fandom, he had unintentionally created a war with the new fans of Superman, the ones who were created by Zack Snyder. And what James Gunn failed to realize was that the thing they were doing to Superman was exactly the same thing that Disney was doing with their inspirational figure Snow White. You see, way back in 2024, Snow White was reportedly the most highly anticipated movie to be released in 2025, but we all know the real reason why Snow White was the most highly anticipated movie to be released in 2025 It was not because people loved it, in the contrary, people hated it, and the real reason why it was the most highly anticipated movie to be released in 2025 was because millions of people were hating on it online, and that is exactly what is happening to Superman, and the new Superman movie have to succeed, because if the new Superman fails, the entire DC cinematic universe fails along with it, and instead of finally have a chance to beat Marvel, DC will go once again back to square one, and they to finally secure them as the comic book publishing company, which will be greater than Marvel. But I believe that DC still has a chance. After all, James Gunn had never failed, especially when it came to movie. And if there is one thing that Superman has always, those was to always have hope. So let me ask you a question: do you think that the new Superman movie will flop or succeed? Leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments. Would you like to know more about the DC cinematic universe? Then please don't forget to like and subscribe if you would like to stay updated in everything revolving DC and everything revolving the DC cinematic universe.